Hello, everybody. Back for another review, and this time it's part two of the Evil Dead marathon. So now we're going to be focusing on the sequel, Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 is a horror slash black comedy that came out back in 1987. My birth year, by the way. Awesome that I came out the same year a great horror sequel did. Evil Dead 2 essentially picks up right where the first movie left off. Evil Dead, of course. Now, some people will probably have a bit of confusion as to why Evil Dead 2 opens up with Ash and Linda returning to the cabin. Well, the thing is, the first 5 minutes of the movie is basically we're given a bit of a recap of the events of the first film. But of course, what about why is it just Ash and Linda? What about Shelley? What about Scott? What about Cheryl? Where are they at? Well, around this time, Evil Dead 2 came out, 87, and the original was in 81, so it's a 6-year gap, so naturally the other actors couldn't have been found, and they couldn't have found the original actress to play Linda again, so they hired someone new to play Linda this time. So essentially, we're just given a bit of a little recap of what happened in the first film, and right after that, when the evil force goes through the cabin and picks up Ash and throws him into the tree, that's where Evil Dead 2 actually begins. So basically, Ash is, slowly going insane. Yeah, there's a car going up the hill. Sorry. There's Ash pretty much has gone completely insane now that he's on his own and the evil is still out there trying to take him down. And, Professor Noby, the person who actually recited the passages from the book and ultimately unleashed the evil first, his daughter Annie, her boyfriend, and a couple of locals show up to the cabin and ultimately end up becoming victims of the Evil Dead themselves. So Ash pretty much, has to become more of a full-fledged hero here than he was in the first movie. That's pretty much Evil Dead 2 in a nutshell, more or less. But what follows is, like I said, basically after the first Evil Dead, Sam Raimi wanted to try to move on to other things, and ultimately his follow-up film was this movie, Crime Wave, which came out in 1985. Unfortunately, Crime Wave was a huge financial and critical flop, and it hurt Sam Raimi so much he almost wanted to give up filmmaking at that point until I believe it was Irvin Shapiro. His name's not on the back here. It might be on the back for Evil Dead 2 here. Yeah, there it is. Irvin Shapiro, I think, was the guy's name. He basically said to Sam Raimi, look, you had a lot of success with the first Evil Dead. Why don't you just do another one? And naturally, he thought, okay, well, I guess we'll do a sequel then, and naturally, Evil Dead 2 came to be, and although, in my opinion, although the first Evil Dead was the film that began Sam Raimi's career, Evil Dead 2 was the movie that saved his career. In fact, if it weren't for Evil Dead 2, we wouldn't have, Darkman, we wouldn't even have Spider-Man if it weren't for Evil Dead 2. This was the movie that truly gave birth to Sam Raimi's career. He almost wanted to quit filmmaking right as soon as he finished up Crime Wave, but then he thought, yep, got to do another Evil Dead, and yep, before you know it, we got this one. Evil Dead 2 is, I want to say, it almost feels like an entirely different film compared to the first movie. While the first film has a bit of a slow yet incredible scare factor to it, Evil Dead 2 literally kicks it into high gear and gives us an incredible kinetic pace of a film, and I get the feeling it just does not let up. The movie was also made on a much higher budget than the first Evil Dead. The first Evil Dead was like $350,000. The sequel was like $3.5 million. So you're talking like 10 times more than what the first movie offered, which means you can definitely tell the movie was made on a higher budget. The special effects are wilder and crazier, and you can definitely tell that they have more effort put into them than what he could have accomplished with the first movie. But I'm not to say that the first movie didn't have terrible effects. It actually had some really good stuff at the time. But Evil Dead 2 just kind of took things to a whole new level. I get the feeling that this was the Evil Dead movie that Sam Raimi always wanted to make. Like, in his mind, Evil Dead 2 is like the closest he got to perfection with the Evil Dead franchise. And with that being said, the movie also was a more successful hit at the box office than the first movie. And again, the sequel was released unrated, no rating. And it grossed like around probably close to $5 million in its theatrical run. And also, it was met with even more positive reception by critics than the first movie. Something I should have mentioned with the first Evil Dead. It did get positive reviews by critics, but Evil Dead 2 got even better. So much better, in fact, it even got the attention of film critic Roger Ebert, who actually praised the film, too. Which is unsurprising, because Roger Ebert's not usually a big fan of horror films, even though he will praise classics like Psycho and Halloween and a few others. But Evil Dead 2, like I said, he called it manic-inspired genius. A great time. Evil Dead 2 did pick up some nominations at the Saturns, picking up 3 of them for special effects, makeup, and for Best Horror Film, which I believe it did not win any of them. Special effects, I believe it lost that year to RoboCop. Makeup, I think, also went to RoboCop. And Best Horror Film, Evil Dead 2 actually lost to The Lost Boys that year for Best Horror Film. But Evil Dead 2 there was some pretty good competition that year, because it wasn't just The Lost Boys it was nominated up against. It was also up against Near Dark, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, Pumpkinhead. So yeah, there was Hellraiser. There was a tough competition that year, but in the end, nonetheless though, Evil Dead 2 has gone on in history. It often ties with Dawn of the Dead as being the best horror sequel of all time, and in recent years, it's being credited as one of the best movie sequels ever made. I feel like Sam Raimi is starting to be like James Cameron. I mean, he too has directed a couple of movie sequels that are considered the best of their kind. Like, James Cameron had Aliens and Terminator 2. Sam Raimi has Evil Dead 2, and he also has Spider-Man 2. And he recently directed a third sequel, which was Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and as did James Cameron with Avatar: The Way of Water. So I feel like, yeah, and I think Multiverse of Madness, I think it was better than the first Doctor Strange. At least that's my opinion. Avatar: Way of Water, I'm kind of a little iffed at it, especially with its bulky runtime, but either way. Speaking of runtime, Evil Dead 2 is actually not a long movie at all. It's actually pretty short. Yeah, just a mere 84 minutes in runtime, but those 84 minutes, as the film progresses, it does feel way longer than it should, because it has such a crazy, wild, kinetic pace that it doesn't let up. And by the film's end, I guarantee you, by the end credits, you're going to be sitting back in your chair just like going, oh man, the hell did I just watch? Oh yeah, as I said, the effects are wilder. As for the gore effects, they still hold up pretty well. They're still fun to watch. But this film is not meant for the scare value. It's more for like I guess you could say shock value, and at the same time, it's just like, man, I just kind of wonder what crazy stuff they're going to throw next at the movie. Like, I mean, and the fact is, this was the first film in the series that kind of aimed more toward a sort of a comedic element instead of more of a horror element. Even though the horror element is still there, but it moves on more toward black comedy. I mean, come on, you got a severed hand crawling around the house like Thing from the Addams Family, and even flipping Ash off. That's a high mark for me in comedy right there. You can't help but laugh at that. That's hilarious. That's funny stuff right there. And heck, even look at the cover of the movie. I mean, look at that skull with the eyes. It's like, it's funny, kind of. I mean, the way it's done that way, I mean, it's done obviously to ingest a little humor, pretty much. But hey, I mean, it works out very well. So that's what makes Evil Dead 2 such a fun movie. There's not really much else to say about it. Just that's really it right there. But of course, fans often look at this as the absolute best film in the series, which I don't argue with. Evil Dead 2 is a lot of fun. And it has a couple of regulars, and the makeup work in the film is pretty impressive, especially when you see the possessed Henrietta, which is actually Sam Raimi's brother, Ted Raimi, made up in almost unrecognizable makeup. And even Bruce Campbell gets to become a Deadite himself at one point. Alrighty, let's go ahead and talk about the Blu-ray, shall we? I have the 25th anniversary edition here by Lionsgate. Evil Dead 2, like its predecessor, has been released on home video so many times, it's ridiculous. I first saw it on VHS by Western Video at my grandfather's video store, which it was sitting right next to the first Evil Dead on the shelf. And I've owned that copy for many years until I decided to get the DVD by Anchor Bay, and then I got the Blu-ray by Anchor Bay, and then finally I got the 25th anniversary here by Blu-ray by Lionsgate. Now, I am aware Lionsgate did put out a 4K version of the movie, so I don't own that one. I really have no desire to. So, let's take a look here. Now, the Anchor Bay Blu-ray was not perfect, but it was by far the best presentation of the film up to that point. But the Lionsgate Blu-ray supposedly did a complete remaster of the film, giving the film a more... They did a bit of a restoration work on the movie. And again, like the first movie, Evil Dead 2 wasn't meant to be a pretty looking film. No, it wasn't. But Lionsgate did the best they could in restoring the film, so the film is presented in 1:8.5 widescreen. It was actually shot in widescreen, no full frame like the first movie was. And honestly, the picture looks pretty good on the disc. I mean, it's not perfect, but there's more detail here than I had noticed in any of the previous versions. So honestly, this may be, besides the 4K, one of the best presentations of Evil Dead 2 you're ever going to find. I would say out of 5 stars, I'd probably give the movie probably a 4 out of 5. As for the audio is presented in 5.1 DTS, and honestly, this is basically the same audio track that was on all the previous versions, even on VHS. And Evil Dead 2 is really not one of the best sounding films I've ever seen. The audio track feels a little muffled. It doesn't sound as pulse pounding as most of the audio tracks I've ever seen, but honestly, it's not bad. But it does, keep the films, it does meet with the movie very well. I mean, the dialogue comes out very well. Sound effects are actually fun to hear, but you kind of expect a bit more of an oomph for the audio. I would say for the audio, I'd probably give it maybe a 3.5 out of 5. It still sounds good, but it doesn't have that massive uptick. I really wish it had it. As for the bonus features, this Blu-ray comes jam-packed with material. Starting off, we get an audio commentary with Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Scott Spiegel, the co-writer, and makeup artist Greg Nicotero. It's actually the same commentary that was from the Anchor Bay DVD and the Anchor Bay Blu-ray. This commentary, all I can say, it's actually a lot of fun to listen to. These guys talk nonstop about the movie. It's a lot of fun. There's a brand new documentary on the making of the film that's actually spread out in several... Dead by Dawn, The Chosen Ones, all these little tidbits right here. They're all actually part of that Up to Rosebud. This is all actually part of one massive documentary that runs about an hour and a half long, and it's a very comprehensive look at the making of the film. It even has interviews with all the actors that worked on the movie, too. All 5 of the cast members that were in the cabin at the end. Bruce Campbell, Sarah Berry, who played Annie, Danny Hicks, who was... Jake, Ted Raimi, the possessed Henrietta, Cassie Wesley was Bobby Joe, and Richard Domere was Ed. So yeah, unfortunately, there is no interviews with Sam Raimi, as I think the documentary came out in, when did the Blu-ray come out? I think it was 2011, although 25th anniversary, that 87, this would have been 2012, and I think around that time, Sam Raimi was getting ready to start shooting Oz the Great and Powerful at the time. Road to Woodsboro, it's a brand new journey back to the original shooting location. Cabin Fever is a series of production videos that were taken on the set of the film by Greg Nicotero. There also are archival featurettes. One of them is called The Gore the Merrier. It's like a half-hour look at the gore effects in the movie, and has interviews with the KMB guys, Greg Nicotero, Howard Berger, and Robert Kurtzman, as they all talk about the movie. There's also a Behind the Screams featurette, which is basically a bunch of stills and behind-the-scenes stuff that's actually got a audio interview with Tom Sullivan as he talks about his experiences on the movie, and still galleries and trailers. So honestly, this is actually a really nice supplemental package to come with Evil Dead 2. And honestly, I would originally give the extras probably a 4 out of 5, but with this new hour-and-a-half documentary created specifically for this release, I'd have to bump the extras up to a solid 5. Yep. Solid 5 out of 5 for the extras. That's how much good material there is to be found there. So all in all, this is actually a really good release of the movie. It has by far one of the best looking video qualities of the film. The audio, not perfect, but it suits the film very well. And with its brilliant supplemental package, I highly recommend Evil Dead 2. It's actually it's a great follow-up to the first movie. So in other words, highly recommended. Especially for those of you that haven't seen it yet, you really have no idea what you're in for. But for those of us who know Evil Dead 2 in and out, you know that this is such a fun movie. And for many people out there, like I said, they look at Evil Dead 2 as the absolute best film of the trilogy. Well, now it's a quintet because of the fifth one, Evil Dead Rise. So, this concludes the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will continue to do more videos like this in the days to come. And if you haven't checked out Part 1 of the Evil Dead trilogy, definitely check it out. And I will get Part 3 up soon. We'll be talking about Army of Darkness in the next one. So until then, take care and be safe.